Tell me a little bit more about what you do. I can tell you this is going to be conversational.
One background on myself, my initial career,
Siv has over 2 decades of experience and a track record of scaling businesses by 5x. What sort of sales strategies do you implement in your company, or have you implemented in other companies?
So I think there's two things that are really important. My experience is,
what is your go-to strategy for keeping growth on track and profitability?
It's a really good question.
Ladies and gentlemen, today's guest, Siv Sivanesan, is the CEO of Volenday Group, where he drives innovation and growth across a portfolio of tech-enabled professional services. Siv has over 2 decades of experience and a track record of scaling businesses by 5x in global markets in 3 to 5 years, including successes at True and Accenture, a global organization. And he will be sharing his insights that help businesses thrive in today's competitive landscape. Please welcome.
Great to be on board, John.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you, especially someone who's been on both sides in the software industry and focused on the sales, the marketing, and the recruiting. So tell me a little bit about your experience having worked with, Accenture and dealing with high-level clientele and high-level companies, and what was your methodologies by, growing them by 5x?
So I think in terms of growing businesses, I think there's a very different pace that you can operate at a large corporate like Accenture versus when I kind of left Accenture and started working with medium-sized companies that have the ambition but not necessarily all the tools to help them scale and grow. And I think a lot of the skills that I learned at Accenture helped me apply it into those contexts. So, within an Accenture, scaling and growing is about how you grow the connectivity you already have. Accenture is already going to be in all the, S&P 500, right? It's about how you kind of work into that and leverage those relationships and grow. Whereas after I left Accenture, the challenge was actually how do you take brands and companies that have got good products, delivering great services, but actually get them into new names and really create new channels for them to scale and grow into.
Yeah. And so along the way, though, what allowed you to make the decision to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to do my own thing?
It wasn't the easiest. I think I had a friend of mine at university, and we both did computer science, and I went the corporate route. He went the Silicon Valley route. And I remember visiting him in San Francisco. I think it was like 2008, 2009. And I just remember the energy and the drive, and it felt so different to the Accenture environment. And I think, from that point, I had an itch to go see what I could do without the guardrails, right? What could I do on my own and how I could scale? But like most good stories, it also happened a little bit by chance, by accident. I kind of fell involved in the business. I was going to go practitioner, in recruitment, and ended up being asked to run the business rather than execute on it. And, I got the bug, and I've absolutely loved it. And it's not easy. It's not easy, I think, as you know, as a business owner, but it's so rewarding when you make it happen.
Yeah, you said you got the bug. It's a virus that all entrepreneurs have. I've had the virus for more than 30 years, literally running and scaling my own companies, and I've done it in 7 different countries around the world. And that doesn't even include the other companies that I've worked with, whether it's in UK, Australia, Japan, America. It's a bug. It's a virus. So having the virus, how has it changed your perspective on helping other companies scale their business?
I think a lot of things is true when you kind of look at business scaling. You can pick up a textbook and it'll probably tell you roughly what the right answers are, things to do, right? Have focus, have good systems, have a clear strategy. And all of these things are true. And in the red mist of trying to scale and make something happen, most of those things go out the window. And actually it's having the patience, consistency, and fortitude to follow that through. And remembering no matter how important technology is, people count. And actually the people if you can gather disproportionate good talent, good things will generally come, especially if you've got them aligned in terms of what their personal goals are and what they're trying to achieve. And I think the things that I've enjoyed, we talked about having the bug. The thing that I think I found most rewarding is seeing the impact I've been able to have by people being really successful in the environments that I've been able to set up. For me, that's like the best feeling, right? Seeing people go, if from a sales context, previously they might be building hundreds of thousands to be building millions. That's transformative, right? Those are skills and things they're not going to forget and change the trajectory of their careers as well as the organization.
Yeah, I agree. Amen. Business is not about products, services, and buildings that people work in. It's really about the people. And the more you take care of them, the more they'll take care of you as a company. So, in your expertise, as far as, building out sales models and sales strategies and marketing strategies and recruiting strategies, obviously recruiting comes first, right? So, tell me a little bit about what can companies do, right, to have an unfair advantage? Because, you talk about earlier, you can buy these textbooks and you can study business and you can go to college, and don't tell me anything about college actually being implemented, because a lot of the times those things all go out the door, especially when COVID, a black swan event, hits you across the head. Look what that did to the world. And they're turned into two different camps, victors and victims, right? And really, a lot of people said, well, I lost my business or I lost this because COVID or their lack of ability to pivot.
What I found most difficult through COVID, like I was out of Accenture and scaling this search firm at the time, was not having a sense of knowing when you were winning. Everyone knew that there were going to be winners and losers, but you didn't know a line where to stop, and you didn't know if you're winning. And that's really hard, right? Normally you'd be kind of like, hey, okay, we're doing this well. These are our targets. This is how we're going. But in that environment, you just had to dig in and battle through, and you wouldn't find out. And it turns out we were one of the winners, right? But we didn't know that at the time. And that was gnawing at you every single day, every morning, every evening, every Zoom call. You're like, I don't know. Like, are we going to make it through? What do we have to burrow through? You just have to do the best that you could do. But I agree, like, I don't think that was obviously a unique and challenging time for sure.
I get it. But when you talked about people, that's, we did really well in COVID, and we scaled because I have a very pivotal mindset in that this is not going to happen to me mindset. And okay, this happened. And now we got to pivot and make shit happen.
Completely
Make
agree.
things happen.
And I think part of that was doing that, but acting, but not overreacting. I think there was a lot of organizations that wanted to, I was thankfully not part of one where we built up a capacity on a team, we leaned in, where there was a lot who cut back, let people go very quickly. And actually, when things started to come good, they didn't have the capacity, capability, and people to make that happen. They'd also lost their teams because they were like, hey, so it turns out when things get hard, we're the first ones to go. You kind of lose a lot of trust and faith with the organizations. But I mean, back to the question you asked around, how do you create kind of disproportionate outcomes with people? I think there's a few things. I think one, and especially when building a sales organization, a lot of smaller businesses struggle with the fact that they'll probably hire a person or two people. And that's super dangerous, right? It's basically like being a VC, venture capital firm, and only investing in two firms. You're likely to struggle. You're likely to lose. The chances are that you knew exactly what to do, how to do it, and find the right person is tough. And so I think one of the things is being able to hire in or being able to invest enough, right? So that you can kind of get enough of the right quality people. I think the second is being able to act quickly if they don't turn out to be right, either culturally or performance-wise. I think it's something you have to act. I think, poor performance or lack of energy and drive is a different kind of virus that can really spread within your organization. You really got to be on top of that. And on top of the macro numbers, but the people mechanics, does, John in sales have a buddy in the firm that he kind of, gets on with, right? Little things. Does he have a gang that he hangs out with, feels connectivity to? As much as, is he developing and learning? Is he kind of, hitting his numbers? Is he, going out and having the right conversations, right? Thinking about people holistically rather than just about the function that they're looking to hit, I think helps you get the most from them. And then also means that I think that the other aspect is I spend a lot of time in interviewing. I think there's a, Simon Sinek wrote the book, Start with Why, right? I'm a big believer in that. And, I spend a lot of time exploring what is their why. I spend a lot of time going, here's my organizational why. Like, what's your why? And do those things align? Because I think we can all go through really tough, challenging stuff, hard quarters, difficult years, but you got to know it's worth it on the other side. Why am I doing this? Am I doing this for my kids? Am I doing this because I want to get rich? Am I doing this because I want to leave a legacy as it relates to impact of how sales I should be done? What is it, the thing that's actually driving them? And then making sure that they will connect and support it around that. Because I think when you do that, you can get through most things. When you don't have that, that's when you're unstable. That's when someone picks up the call to your sales guy and goes, hey, I've got this other opportunity. Then like, well, I'll listen. I'll hear. Maybe I will go the other side because they've got no good reason that's grounding them to the organization and why they've got to stay. And so, I spent a disproportionate time, especially in the early days, doing kind of hiring and getting in interviews because it was going to disproportionately affect the culture of the organization and it was going to disproportionately affect our outcomes. And so I think, any good business leader, especially when they're building the cornerstones of the organizations they're going to build from, shouldn't delegate the entire recruitment experience to someone else. And some were surprised. They're like, I don't understand why the leader of the business is here talking to me. And I'm like, well, you are the business. And so if you come in, I need to know that, you're going to fit well and disrupt in the right way, not the wrong.
Yeah, I get it. And so excellent salespeople can sell themselves in an interview. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. And at the same time, they can turn out to be toxic for the culture and or only care about themselves. So what is your system for actually interviewing and identifying red flags to get, to eliminate as much as possible that toxic individual who potentially can pollute your culture?
So I think there's two primary things and there's a third backstop. The first two primary things, I think often when hiring salespeople, doing proper reference checks and actually speaking to their customers, speaking to others and their experience around that. Again, they're likely to give you positive ones, but focusing on the cues. What did they focus on? How did they grow and maintain? What was the experience like with their colleagues and others? And then I think the other one comes back to a little bit about exploring the motivations, right? How much were they, as they grew, did they talk about team? How much they talk about how they invested into others as well as themselves, right? I think it's okay. I think there's often different types of salespeople. Some people are more builders than buyers. And typically in sales, you talk about hunters versus farmers, right? But I think from a business scaling perspective, thinking about who are those ones going to help you build a great sales organization versus who are those who are going to, going to go bill as you need them to. And you got to have a mix. You can't just have all of one type. Like that's not going to work. But I think when you explore those motivations, people often betray themselves a little bit in terms of where they're focused and how they are. And that requires a certain level of curiosity beyond what numbers could you hit and what would be your approach to doing that. Now, we all will still get it wrong, right? I don't care who you are and how great an interviewer you are, you will still get some wrong. And that's where I think it's really important for the organization to see what you do when you do get it wrong. Both for keeping potential, people who might behave badly in check, right? Because they're like, oh, okay, these guys take it seriously. If I don't meet these values, then I'm not done that. But also the organization to see that we're really serious, or that organization is serious about not putting up with those kind of characters.
Like pivoting to the recruiting and the process of the recruiting and actually filtering out people, what sort of sales strategies do you implement in your company or have you implemented in other companies that you found to be most effective for that 5x scaling?
So I think there's two things that are really important. My experience has predominantly been with services and predominantly B2B services at that. And so in terms of the sales cycle, there's a disproportionate impact on creating a flywheel and a positive effect on the work you do, really driving for halo clients that you can really shout about, that your core client base that you're going after is going to kind of understand, right? And so when kind of building the sales strategy, unsurprisingly, a key element of that is not just focus for the organization, but focus for the specific sales individuals, right? So, okay, we are tackling this addressable market, say, for example, within financial services. Okay, you've really focusing on this vertical within insurance in the London market, right? So making sure that not only the organization has its focus, but the individual or the sales individuals have their clear focus and where they're targeting, because we need to then explore two things, I think, very heavily. One, again, because a lot of people buy services through recommendation, right? Unless you're a brand name like Accenture, generally, if you're kind of like a mid-sized business, you're going to operate through recommendation. So you're looking to do two things. One, really kind of see who the influencers on the channel for determining who's making what buying decisions. And then secondly, make sure that the work you do, people really want to shout about. It's critical. I mean, I know it's not new to say, client satisfaction is important, right? It's not a new concept, but it's just everything, right? Disproportionate outcomes to expectations is, because people are so, if I take recruitment, if I take technology, people are so used to being disappointed, that when they get something that's actually great and they feel like, they weren't squeezed, they're well looked after, and they can't wait to go tell some people that they had a great experience, right? And I think if you can energize the influencing channel and do that couple of work, it will take a little while, and that's where you've got to be patient, right? So often in the builds that I've done, the first 18 months can feel a little quiet by comparison to the consequent 18 months, right? But it's the foundations that you build in the market, the reputation that you build, that I think makes all of the difference, coupled with, again, clear focus and understanding which segments you're targeting and why.
Okay, good. And so what's one of the biggest pitfalls you think leaders face when scaling up too fast? Because you've worked with several different industries, and now you're working in the technology industry more so than services, and you're literally building out solutions, software solutions, customized software solutions for companies. And where do you think they get in trouble?
I think there's probably three different areas. I think the first area they often get in trouble is not when scaling, knowing when they really understood whether they've cracked their product market fit, and start investing too heavily into things that are more a build it and they will come kind of capacity. And so they're ready for scale before they've proven the things to say that they're ready to scale. So prioritizing, making sure that they've really got that early on, I think is key. And I think it's easy to not do. You look at the, you can get enthusiastic about where you're going and your belief in where the product's going.
Especially if you have the virus.
Yeah, especially, right? Because you're like, it's all going to happen. And, your job is often to make everyone around you believe, right? And that starts to rub off on yourself a little bit. And you need to make sure that you're checking yourself as to whether you're genuinely hitting those things. And I think being diligent from the outset around that is important. So that's one area I think there can be an issue. The second is not planning sufficient time for cultural shifts. If your organization was, steady as she goes, organic growth, reasonable margin, but, not electrifying, and you move to high value, high margin, high impact services, or, that's going to be a real change from everything from how you think about your finances to the type of talent you bring through and the kind of culture the organization is ready to absorb. And you do that too quickly and in an elegant fashion, you can lose a lot of people along the way. Right. The other thing I'd say is there's different phases to that growth story where you can lose people along the way. So there's the change to the new business model. You can lose a whole. Sometimes it's right that some of those people aren't going to transfer along the way. And then you start making that humming and they're like, oh, this is great. We're really successful. And then suddenly they're like, okay, here's another 100% of the organization. They're like, we've lost our identity and who we are. And I think that's really, you got to be really, we talked about how important people are. We talked about how important keeping them motivated and focused is. When doing that again, it's critical that you get that on the right side of that. And that's not just for the mainstay of the organization, it can often be for the founder of the business too. I've worked with a number of different founders who found that at different stages in the journey, they're maybe less interested than they were, but they might be quite important to getting to the next bit where they can maybe kind of, step back a little bit. So those are some of the things I think I would call out that I think is missed. And then the final one, I said 3, is is really about making sure that they've got the right systems to scale, right? In terms of just really understanding the core things that you've got your understanding of your unit economics, right? Ultimately, when I early on in my career, I had a boss, and he was just like, always just follow the money, right? If you don't know what the money's doing, you don't know what you're doing, right? I think that's absolutely critical when you think about the scale, because as you go through that journey, you've got to separate investments from, is the core unit economics of the business working? And that will allow you to think about different deal strategies, especially when it comes to pricing, the kind of talent you can bring in. But if you're just so focused on just getting to a stage and you lose sight of that, you'll have you'll have a mess that won't scale and won't necessarily throw off the kind of cash you think it will do.
Yeah, and eventually chaos. So how do you spark innovation in a company that's hit stagnation after going through those different levels of growth?
So when you hit stagnation, I think there's an element of rediscovering the new purpose, right? You hit the goal. It's kind of like that championship winning team that's kind of won the championship. They've wanted it for 20 years. They got there and they're like, now what? Like, how do I get motivated again, right? And I think as part of that, that also means weeding out those that are ready to go again and those that aren't, right? And not pushing those that aren't to try and do something they're not ready, but also bringing in new individuals who want to get to the next point, who are appropriately incentivized to get to the next bit, and up re-upping and driving in that direction. I think that is really important. And again, comes down to knowing and driving those motivations. And I know I've said that a number of times, here, but these are people businesses, and you've just got, as someone who's looking to drive significant change, you really got to know what makes everyone tick. And that's not static, right? Because it's not just that, hey, we've reached this new growth point. It could be like, I've started a family and I've got young kids, and I don't necessarily have the same time availability or desire to operate as I did, right? And that's not true of all parents. Some people, they have kids and it spurs them on to do even more because they're like, hey, I want to give this child everything, right? But understanding that, I think, and continuing to understand that and monitoring that is something that's often overlooked and a key part of making sure that the engine keeps moving forward.
Yeah, and so you've helped a lot of companies even expanding globally. What do you think the first move that ensures? What are the things that you can do or companies should do to ensure lasting success, not just having a quick splash or being a trend?
I think when entering into new markets, and I've launched a number, I think you've got to make sure you've got the right person or people, and that's got a blend of cultural DNA from the organization, right? But also someone who really understands the market going to enter into, right? You see some people, they've got a really brilliant executive operating out of HQ. They're like, hey, go to X and go make it happen. And you know what? There are people with tenacity that will. However, the amount of time and energy lost along the way by not having someone who really understands the nuances of that specific market, can be great. And so in each of the markets that I've helped open in, that's something that I've explored tirelessly and been like, hey, do you know what? If we can't find the right person, we shouldn't go in at any costs, right? We need to make sure we find the right people or group of people that can really kind of get us going, who already have, to some degree, some of the right connections. They understand us, they understand the market, and then see them with maybe some other talent but they're in charge to kind of drive that forward. And I think when doing that, I think it's important to allow strategic consistency, but allow tactical variance, right? Just allow different markets to operate slightly differently. You can get businesses that are smothered by global sales rates, and you're trying to sell a price in one market that is just not going to fly in another, right? And that might be just from a margin perspective or a price perspective. But that could also do with nuances of the product or the services as well, right? And so I think allowing yourself to have that flexibility within some constraints, there comes a point where there isn't synergy with the mothership and it's just an offshoot. That's probably not the right setup. But I think, allowing for that is really, really important.
Hey, folks, if you're enjoying this episode and you're picking up what I'm putting down and what the guests are actually putting out there, do me a favor, like and comment what you liked about the episode, or even comment what would you like to hear? What topics would you like to hear in the future? Because believe me, it matters. I read absolutely every single one of them, and I want to bring you more and more value to help companies scale so that we can grow this podcast to make a bigger difference. Now let's get back to the show. In a tight talent market, how do you grab the best people before Google, Facebook, Accenture, and not only how do you recruit them, but how do you retain them? Because, especially in the tech world, there's a lot of competition, and you have a tech team in the Philippines, as an example, and they have lots of opportunities, global opportunities, and and I know because I have a team there too.
No, absolutely. I think a lot of it comes down to, so I talk about it in two parts. The getting them and then keeping them.
Yep.
I think in the getting them, I think it's about understanding what they don't like today, right? So, okay, I might be at a major organization, but I haven't grown. I'm waiting for my boss to keel over or find another job. I've got no, necessary progression. I'm not necessarily working on the kind of work that excites me. Or, you've got a lot of overlooked talent in the market, right? Who are doing really great things, but they've been taken for granted by the companies that they're working with, right? And so there is a job to kind of seek out, I think especially when you're coming up through, you don't have the options to just drop ridiculous money to kind of just pull over whoever you can, right? You've got to be smart about who you get. And that's where, I often kind of look in the areas where others overlook, right? Where they kind of look down on people who come from certain, companies or markets or again, who've been in certain places who have potential for doing something new. But again, it comes back to, you've got to be upfront and honest, otherwise you won't retain them. So you need to be really transparent on the way in as to what will be exciting about them coming in. And a lot of that comes down to, growth. A lot of people want to know that they'll grow. And one of the things that I think happens in a lot of organizations, a lot of people actually, when they go in for a role, their focus is, what is my earning potential in the next 2 years? And what am I going to do in the next 2 years? Not what am I going to be able to do in the next 2 years that might mean that I can have outsized performance in 10 years' time, right? And I think a lot of talent, when you speak to them about that, it's really an eye-opener, right? In terms of, actually, have you really thought about where you're going long term? Have you really thought about what's going to enable you most and the kind of people you're going to have around you to support you do that? And I think when they believe that, both in the context of compensation, type of work, but also the growth that they can have there and the opportunity, and you're honest with them that, it's going to be hard, right? Like, there's a lot of times I'll say, are you sure you want to come be part of a build, right? Especially if they've been in a more corporate context. But I think that honesty translates, and then it's down to them to kind of convince you that they are really up for it, right? I think a lot of what I find fascinating actually in the recruitment process is a lot of companies will start by lots of screening calls. You'll meet one manager, you'll meet another person, you'll meet another person, and they're asking you questions, right? They're like, so can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do this? How did you do that? How did you do this? And I'm like, wow, like, let's just think about this from a sales perspective for a second, right? I want this talent, right? And I wait until when to sell them on the idea that they want to be here, to give them the conviction to go through the process. So one of the things that I did, and people found strange, was before it was that I'd do the HR screening, right, the recruiter screening, but after that, I'd often be the first meet if they were decent, right? And I would really build conviction of why they'd want to come join the organization, so that when they went through the next conversations, they could do the normal things and check that they can do the job and all the rest of it. But they were really excited to go through the process. And I'm always surprised at the number of firms who don't do that, don't sell through the recruitment process and miss the opportunity to convince someone. Because, especially if you're an up and coming firm, it's on you to convince them why they should come to you often rather than the other way around. Because as you say, they'll have options.
That's right. So how do you feel about training bonds for retention and growth for the individuals?
I think, having things that say, hey, like, we expect you to do certain amount of growth and development and get to certain stages is certainly something that I've used in the past. I think And I think also can be useful to say, hey, do they back themselves to get them where they need to be? And sometimes I think whether it's, hey, here's a lean compensation structure, but hey, if you do well, you do really well, and have them lean into that mindset can be really helpful. Because if you've got a person who's so risk focused that they're petrified by the fact that they might not achieve X, Y, or Z, they're probably not the right person to be part of a build, even if they're a good, steady performer, right? Because they'll waste too much time and energy worrying about that, worrying about failure, than necessarily kind of charting forward.
I get it. What is some of the strategies and tactics you use to keep people laser focused on really delivering what customers need and keeping the standard high when there's so much noise, right?
I think there's kind of a couple of things. I think the overlooked thing, especially sometimes in software development and tech development, is actually really listening to the requirements and really understanding what the client wants. Not that they want this feature or that feature or this drop down or this bit of AI tooling. What is the real business case behind why they're doing what they're doing? Because you can only create outsized results if you understand the results that they're really measuring it by. And they're often not measuring it by, I successfully deployed software X. And I think helping the teams more generally understand that, everyone through from our developers to our UX designers through to our testers, really understanding what is the purpose and outcome of this, and therefore what's important in the system, can really help you prioritize what to focus on and what to invest most energy on. And also when you can see things that are going to interrupt that value chain that the client is looking for. And so we do that by, we use something called the Double Diamond Framework. And, when you work with a lot of customers today, especially within tech, they want you building now, right? And it's uncool to say, hey, let's talk about your requirements. But what we've created is what we lean on as a framework where it focuses really on define, discover and define. It's kind of like, are we asking the right questions and are we doing the right thing before we start doing a thing? It's so much cheaper for all concerned, right, to figure that out up front and make sure we understand that before proceeding. And so not only is that something that we deliver into our clients, it's actually a thing that we use to screen as to whether we want to work with a client or not. If a client can't really demonstrate it understands why it wants to build a thing and has shades of a vanity project or the shades of a, hey, we're doing this thing because we feel like we need to have a thing, A, they're unlikely to be a good, Halo credential in time. B, they're likely to lose this interest in later. Or C, when they suddenly figure out what they do want, they might start blaming us because we didn't deliver a thing that they didn't know that they needed. And that's not to say that we don't employ a agile methodology where we can evolve and shape based on what's going on. But that, I think that team seeing that we value that, the team seeing that we through our process validate they really understand that, means that we're more likely programmatically to create great outcomes, and it forces our teams to be great listeners.
Amen. I love it. I use what's called the dad framework, and I love being a dad. So it's in alignment with your process. It's define, align, and then we design. I call it the dad framework.
I like that.
Yeah. So because ultimately, if you don't define the solution with the client, you're gonna potentially waste millions of dollars, and you're gonna waste a lot of money if it's not defined, and then if it's not aligned with your organization building something that's not just vanity, but you see the value in it for them. And then finally putting out a design for them to sign off on that they're ready to rock and roll. So
I agree.
I've been in the software industry for a while, not as long as you, but literally that's how we talk to our clients when, even if they're asking for configuration and or customization. I like the dad framework.
I think it's really good. I think the hard thing about being a provider in this is I think every provider out there would say that they'd want their clients to do it. The problem is that clients don't want to do it. They're doing lots of hard thinking. And this is another bit of hard thinking to do that they've got to have real focus and figure out. And depending on how important the thing is, you get different levels of willingness to actually put in the time to think through it. And that's where I think two things are important. I think one, this is the reason why a lot of people buy SaaS off the shelf software, because I don't need to think about it. I'm borrowing someone else's process, someone else's software, someone else's structure. And they, of course, know what they're doing. They've sold it to loads of people. Therefore, it must work for us. We'll just figure it out, right? And the problem with that, as you'll know, is you'll end up with a lot more software than you need. It will be really complicated to get the people to use it because it doesn't align with how they're working. Like, you said earlier on, salespeople don't want to enter things into systems. They also don't want to work in a different way to the way they work, right? And so it's critical, and that's the same for a lot of industries and places. So having something that actually flows with your organization, right, rather than the organization needs to change to fit it, that's the cost of that defined time, right? And I think I feel like we're going on a bit of a mission, and it's funny, I don't see other software providers as competition. I see us like, partners in arms trying to help shift that view in the market. For 15 years, buying generic has been the way to go. Right. But things have changed. Technology's improved. The ability to deploy, custom software is easier. You can own the IP. You can create exactly what you need. You can do that better job. But I think to help clients along with that, I think is also why it's important in that define phase. You obviously, I'm sure when you're talking to your clients about sales stuff, you know all about it. You can really help guide them through that define bit. I think it's why it's critical when you are doing that custom bit of software, you have some experts with you or part of that journey that can help navigate that, so they can do some of that thinking for them. When I was at Accenture, I used to say, 70% of the job was coming up with the right questions before the client does. So so they get used to the fact it's, hey, I'll have this person on at $1,500, $2,000 a day rate, but hey, they make my life easy, right? Because they're thinking and they know this stuff ahead of me. And I think for software companies at this time, we need to be able to do a bit of both. We can't just be able to talk about the tech. We need to be able to talk about the businesses too.
I get it. Yeah. And, it's all, I think, life and business is situational, right? So like when, the economy tightens, what is your go-to strategy for keeping growth on track and profitability?
It's a really good question. I think there's no one easy answer. I think it's about understanding the timing of your service, right? Now, some of it, you're just repositioning, right? Before it was about growth, now it's about cost cutting. And often a lot of products you can put into market can probably do a little bit of both, depending on how you phrase it and angle it. And I think that understanding of that timing is critical. I mean, we talked earlier about scaling and growth. I think understanding market timing, I think some says, timing beats effectiveness 9 times out of 10, right? You can be really great at what you do, but you don't get the timing right. You're a fly against the wall. And so, I think understanding what they're shifting at that point, not just generically, but specifically what the shifting needs and challenges. I think ultimately, it's all about having your finger on the pulse of what are the problems and challenges my clients are facing today, and how are they going to extract value out of that? Okay, because something can have a problem, but if they can't extract either significant saving or significant market upside, how are we going to extract our value from that upside? And so I think staying really close to that, and it's kind of like a back to basics pure, right, in terms of what you're doing, I think also means that you need to be even better on qualification. So yes, on prospecting, you're going to go out, you're going to have a lot of conversation, but there's also likely to be a lot more in a tighter market, a lot more people more likely to waste your time. And so I think it becomes even more critical that your sales team and your services team understand, what it's going to take for someone to really kind of commit at that stage, because otherwise that can really hurt more so than, in an upswing market when, generally there's too much to go around. And I think it's a really pertinent question, I think, in the advent of AI and what it's going to do to the software services industry over the next 10 years, or services in general.
Yeah, and I'm going to go into that. But yeah, it's really dialing in your value proposition so that that's been my experience, is dialing in your value proposition to be unlike others and even potentially disruptive with your value proposition so that you can continue growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, there's data everywhere. And, how do you dial in on metrics that truly measure long-term success for your clients?
I think long-term success for our clients is client by client basis, right? So because we do custom software or we help hire staff, that tends to be quite bespoke depending on the business challenge involved, right? So from that perspective, we've worked with wind farms through to companies that do manufacturing, through to construction companies, through to people in the medical sphere, all sorts, right? And so that goes back to listening and understanding that the client and what creates value for them. I think internally when we think about, there's data and what we need to follow, I think there's a couple of things. One, I think understanding what metric at what point in time is useful to the organization. Because if you understand where your pain points and your challenges at different points, different numbers are going to be important to drive change. And there's only so much change narrative that I think a company can take, and they need to have an understanding of what they're focusing on. Because if you tell them to focus on 20 numbers, that's really difficult to do realistically. It's kind of going, what is the really critical thing? It could be this quarter, this month that we're going to be really targeted on, and shift the needle on that. It doesn't mean you don't talk about the other numbers, but it's kind of like, how do those numbers derive an impact to that core number? And I think having that focus around which is the important numbers is the key, right? And so sometimes that's going to be like, right now, look, we've done really great growth, but we've got to focus on profitability. How do we get better price point in market? Right, might be the focus. At other points in time, in more of a bear market, it might be, hey, we just need to shift. We need to shift more product, and we're not going to be able to push up the price for whatever reason. So, or it could be, again, with software company, it can be often code quality bugs. Approximate to estimations. Because I think in software you got to be super careful because it's famous for overruns. Right, things turn out to be a lot more complicated than you initially thought, and so being really on top of estimates versus actual completion efforts, it can be quite critical.
Yeah, and my experience is that you have to have a track record of time is looking for data insights that you can drill down to determine leading indicators, lagging indicators, and what is going to allow us to grow more fruit and harvest more often, because at the end of the day, those are the insights that matter the most. And I think a lot of people, they look at data and they don't know how to evaluate it to actually make a difference. And so
completely. And I think that what you touch on is so important there, John, because I think there's often looking at the numbers and being able to create a narrative that makes you feel comfortable rather than being able to kind of see the honest truth as to where you are and what action you might need to take.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking to a bank yesterday, 600 branches, 8,000 employees. And even though they have data warehouses, they're like, I really need your help with whether it's AI or building out a summary of the insights so we know what to do, because we're looking at all this data. But, we still don't know. We can dissect the data, but it takes a long time to do it. Can you just provide an AI summary? So I think it's funny. And at the same time, I understand, because they're dealing with millions of transactions, credit cards, different products, different trends, different prices. I just find it so interesting how we have the ability to take that data and literally do upselling, downselling, cross-selling in an instant. And we can evaluate that data within minutes that would take, a team or humans literally days and weeks. And we can do it in a matter of minutes. So
I think that's really important. I think one of the other things when looking at data is understanding what's important at what frequency. Some people don't have information for ages, and then suddenly they get this first view of data, like, it's really useful, right? And they index on that, and like, I want this all the time. And you're like, actually, like, you probably got the insights you needed, right, that carry you forward. And actually the amount of information is just going to become noise, because actually it's going to be roughly near what's there. And I think understanding what information at what point in time, but you're right, then it's just about filtering to make sure that they get what they need when they need it.
Because people are buying different things at Christmas and Easter and Halloween than the rest of the year. That can be consumer goods, but even organizations buying B2B solutions. a lot of them do it end of year so they can write it off, and or beginning of a fiscal year. It's really understanding the data in the marketplace as well as the data within the organization that allows you to be ahead of the curve. And markets change unbelievably fast. What is your secret or tricks for staying one step ahead of the curve to make your business real, relevant, and profitable consistently?
Situations change, fundamentals generally don't, right? So, ultimately, the difference between good and great is often context, right? And whether it's kind of finding the right person or having the right business for the market. And so I think one can lose oneself, right? Worrying about everything that's gonna happen. But I think often if you know your sector and your industry, there's two things to understand. One, again, do you have the right fundamentals? But also, do you understand the kind of market you're operating into? Are you in a situation where you need to take market share? You're taking part of growth. Are you part of a market that's about to get reduced by 50%? And actually, if you stick it out long enough, there'll be great upside once a bunch of people leave the market. I think understanding that context will help you work out what business strategy you should apply, and stops you being one of the many who may be running around too worried about what everyone else is doing and not worrying enough about what you're doing well.
Right on. And, we spoke to AI earlier. This is going to be my last question. You have a team of 50 developers. Are you developing AI, and or how do you see AI changing the future landscape of development?
So with regards to the first question, yes, absolutely. And I'm sure us along with everyone else, right? We are trying to not get too caught up in the hype and being really practical. I think we talked earlier about us being very business case driven when we think about how we work with our clients. And so we built things that are cool, right? That I think our clients find interesting. But we were actually on a phone call with a client the other day. They had a site. They wanted to ingest a bunch of data and be able to allow people to figure out, how they do training around specific thing. And we were able to do that in minutes. And we were like, here you go, right? And they were like, wow. And I was like, this is great, but you're not going to do any extra sales because of that. You're not necessarily going to be stickier because of that. However, there is some really interesting things we can do. So we're using AI, with our clients to help them ingest and find more meaning from their data, but also start to create agents that allow them to run processes that either mean they can do things with less staff, or they can focus the people they have to being more, client focused and client engaged. And actually, we're quite bullish around AI in the custom world, because I think AI is going to mean that people are going to become more and more allergic to generic. Why would I have a generic solution when things can be built that are customer specific to me in that operation? And, whenever, like, for example, LinkedIn, there was the spate where you could see everyone was just going into ChatGPT, give me my viral LinkedIn post and posting it. And very quickly, diminishing returns, people could tell that this stuff wasn't necessarily unique, special, or had that thought. So, certainly with our teams, we think it's going to disrupt services more generally, but we are using it to develop our code. We also have a platform called Arhamatic that allows us to build 70 to 80% of most types of software rapidly, both the front end and the back end. And so we've basically put AI on the front of that to allow us to have an app creator that you give it some requirements, and it basically creates a real life working app that we can then customize from. So we're kind of playing on both sides, but also as a services business, we know as a result of this, long term, there's probably going to be a requirement for less developers, right? But what there will still be a requirement for is people who really understand the client, can really understand how to translate the client's challenges into this stuff, because the client won't always have space and time to really be experts in this and do this. But, as a result of that, I think the market will shift. There'll be a lot less players in 10 years' time than there are today.
And you would be correct.
Right. Absolutely.
It is Siv Sivanesan. And, he's helped lots of companies scale their businesses by 5x in less than 3 to 5 years. And he can definitely help you if you need custom help. He's out there, and you can connect with him, and you can find him ahastudio.io. And you need some custom build for your business to scale, I suggest you reach out. And he's also the CEO of Volenday Group. So if you look up Volenday Group, find him on LinkedIn. He can definitely help literally drop bombs of strategies, people that can use that are still real and relevant right now, regardless of AI. Thank you for being on the show.
No, thank you for having me. It's been great.
That's a wrap, folks. Thanks for joining me today. And if you got value from this episode, do me a favor, like, subscribe, and refer a friend. And if you want even more value, go to thesalesmachine.com, click on resources, and there's tons of resources there to increase profits and drive performance in your business. Right on, come on.